Spezza tracks it down in front. Matthews to Marner. Have to hurry. Tim scores! John Tavares overtime winner!
This is absolutely unbelievable by Austin Matthews. A complete turnaround. Take the cake to Mitch Marner.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of From the Booth. I'm John Bartlett alongside Greg Millen. As today we welcome one of the co-hosts of Rogers Hometown Hockey, Tara Slone.
She's done so many different things in her life. I'm really looking forward to hearing her story.
From meditation to music to broadcast, versatility really is what describes our good friend, Tara Slone. Tara, great to see you. How are you doing?
Well, the answer to that changes at any given moment. It's sort of a moment-to-moment existence right now. Ultimately, I'm fine. I think like everybody, I have moments where I feel gloomy and frightened and feel okay. Overwhelmingly, I would say that I feel grateful. My family is here. We are home in Toronto, able to stay home and isolate, and we're all healthy.
Yeah, I've been watching this from afar. We have grandchildren, and so I know how challenging it must be. I know you have a little one, and how you've been able to, navigate that whole, homeschooling. I mean, you go down the list, right? It's really difficult, I think.
Yeah, it's a work in progress. I think, we're all getting used to a new rhythm. We're all going to bed a little bit later. We're sleeping in a little bit more. Somehow, even without a lot to do work-wise, the days seem to fly by. I think it's about sort of managing expectations and realizing that it's, we can't put in a full school day. Nobody has the attention span. Not my husband or myself, and certainly not our daughter. So, what we're going to be doing is different. She has assignments coming in. She touches base with her teacher once a week. But we just have to do what we can do. And sometimes doing what we can do is a music class. Sometimes it's watching a documentary. I bought a basketball net, so that's phys ed for now. So we're just kind of doing what we can, but we have to be realistic about our expectations.
Well, Tara, it's perfect that you mentioned how you sort of have to balance everything, because that's kind of what I want to do with this show with you today is weave through three different things that kind of intertwine in your life: meditation, music, and broadcast, and how they kind of all came together. So why don't we start more with the beginning? I think you have a cool story in the fact that you're born in Montreal, grew up in the East Coast, you've lived in the West Coast, so you've really experienced the country coast to coast. But maybe you can talk a bit about your beginnings, how you became a hockey fan as a kid, and that then would lead you to a music path.
Well, I mean, I lived in a lot of places. My parents are both Montrealers, and so that's where I was born, but moved to Nova Scotia when I was quite young. I was the product of divorced parents, so I darted back and forth quite a bit. But I certainly consider Nova Scotia to be my home. I guess relevant to the whole story is that my parents, when they were in their early 20s, they were hippies. They went to Woodstock, but they also became students of Tibetan Buddhism. So they started to follow a Tibetan Buddhist master. So I was raised Buddhist, which nowadays is kind of, people are like, oh, that's so cool. And, I used to have to meditate when I came home from school at lunch. But back then it was really weird. I was the only Buddhist kid I knew, and it was certainly not common. Meditation was not a thing, a buzzword. So that's how I grew up. But I really gravitated towards music, and specifically classical music was the first type of singing that I got into. So that was to be my path throughout high school and into university. The long story short is I royally botched my first attempt at university when I was studying opera. So that ended that path. But in a sense, kind of opened the door to rock music, which I also loved. So somewhere in there, I also went to theater school at Concordia in Montreal, but music was always my passion. So music it was. I joined a band when I was 23 called Joy Drop, and the rest, I guess, is history.
I'm very curious. What you don't know, Tara, is I'm a former drummer. That's why we're flaky. I mean, think about that. Drumming and goaltending. Yeah, figure it out. But
No, it totally makes so much sense.
doesn't it though?
Yeah.
And my wife is a symphonic French horn player, so there's a lot of symphonic music around this house as well. So, and went to U of T for music a couple of years ago to get her degree. So I'm getting to the connection here. I just can't figure out how you went from opera to rock. And there's got to be a cool story there somewhere that I'm missing, because that's, I think, very unusual from my limited music background.
I think I just always had a really broad love of music. My dad is a musician. He's a lawyer, but he's also a musician. He has a home studio, and he's kind of a Beatles band, Tom Petty guy. So I grew up around a lot of music. The classical path was really my own. For some reason, I gravitated towards it, and I just loved to sing it. And I didn't really think that I could sing any other kinds of music, although I still loved rock music. And I would say the biggest education that I received was I worked at Sam the Record Man all through high school. So I worked on the classical floor for a bit, but then I worked in the main floor. And so I was exposed to literally everything. So I would, one day I'd be listening to Haydn's Creation, and the next day it was the Black Album by Metallica. So I loved everything. And when the opera path kind of came to a screeching halt for me, because I just was not disciplined enough to follow it at that time, I thought, well, maybe I'll try to sing rock music. I really didn't think I could. Everything I had sung up until then was in my voice like this, and so I didn't know that I could belt. But once I started it, I guess I was able to.
If I was beautiful like you, all the things I would do, those not so blessed would be crying out murder, and I just laugh and get away with it too, like you do. If I was beautiful like you.
And you ended up with Joy Drop by answering an ad in a magazine, didn't you?
It was Now Magazine, which is Toronto's sort of weekly current events newspaper. Back in the days when you used to go to the classified ads and check them out. And when I moved to Toronto back from Montreal, when I was done at Concordia University, I was looking for some musical comrades, and I checked the back of Now Magazine. I'd already answered a couple, and this one said, looking for female rock goddess, call Tony. And I was like, I could be a female rock goddess. And I called Tony. He's like, okay, come meet us. We're at this rehearsal space. And it was, I guess they were auditioning me, but I was auditioning them at the same time. And it was actually, they already had written the song Beautiful, which became our first single. And they played that for me. And I thought, okay, this is a group that's serious. They had their eye on the prize. I didn't know anything about the music business at that time. They were like, okay, we have a manager. We're going to do a demo. We're going to try to get a record deal. And I was along for the ride. It was pretty neat.
And it was a great ride. Joy Drop, was a hit Canadian band, really. And the one video I guess everyone talks about, the most popular song you had there, Sometimes Want to Die, because you had Tommy Lee in the video. That's kind of cool, and it aired on Much Music, and that was pretty big, wasn't it?
Yeah, we so our first single was Beautiful, which actually did better in the States. And then from our second album, Sometimes Want to Die, really took off in this country. We hit #1 on Much More Music, and wow. We were getting ready to do the video, and our director was like, yeah, I have a connection to Tommy Lee. Let's see if he's into it. And I was hesitant, I didn't know what doing a video with Tommy Lee and it would look like. But he loved the song. He said yes right away. And we did it. And the first time I met Tommy was on the set of that video in LA. And he was just lovely. He was a lovely guy. And, I would describe him, the way, if you've seen The Dirt, the movie on Netflix about Motley Crue based on their book, he's a giant kid. He loves music. He's a super eager music fan. So he loved helping us, and it was, it served us very well.
And everywhere I go, and don't ever wanna see somehow almost sets me free. And the space where we meet is different from the rest. And I just can't seem to forget that. My eyes
So after Joy Drop, now you branch out on your own. Now, what was that experience like? Because eventually this does lead to how you get to broadcast, but what was it like going from that experience, learning from a band, to now venturing on your own as a solo artist?
Well, I think anybody who's experienced transitions in their life and career, and both of you would certainly understand that, and Greg, you really would understand that. There's a scary period of time where you're without a net, and so being without the band was frightening. But I had a really good musical soulmate, a guy named Jordan Zadarozny, who lives in Pembroke, Ontario. He has a band called Blinker the Star, which is like one of, I think, the greatest Canadian bands ever. So I went to Pembroke weekends, and the album took years to actually come up with and finish. It wasn't until after, in 2005, I competed on a show called Rockstar in Excess, which was a reality competition show to find the new lead singer of In Excess, that I actually released the album. So it was kind of sitting there for a few years. But how it led me to hockey was, I had this album that I loved so much, and really it didn't sell anything. So that's when I was really without a net and forced to look for new opportunities in my life.
And from there into television. So I have two questions for you. How did you get into television, number one? And then I'm really curious about your connection with music and now being on air and acting as well, and how that has helped you perhaps in your television career that's been so successful.
So the TV thing, it kind of came naturally. I felt like, having been interviewed hundreds of times, that was a unique perspective that not everybody would have. And I certainly knew what it was like to be at the other end of a bad interview. I can't tell you, you guys know, right? The difference between somebody who's done their research, somebody who has listened to your music, or somebody who says, so tell me about your album. And so, I felt like I had an understanding of especially how maybe artists would want to be spoken to and the work that would need to be put in. But I was lucky. It was after Rockstar in Excess, I started to get a lot of opportunities because I was the first Canadian eliminated. So a lot of the entertainment outlets were using me as their kind of Rockstar in Excess correspondent. So I built up a bit of a demo reel, and I just lucked out. I made a decision. I was, that part was one of the hardest things, was, okay, I'm not going to be Tara the musician anymore. I'm going to be Tara the something else. And so I felt like there was a gray area period for me where I didn't know what I was going to do. And then as soon as I made a decision to do something else, the universe started to line things up a little bit better. So I applied for a job at a small station in Toronto called Sun TV. It was owned by Sun Media at the time, but they had to have some local programming. So they had an entertainment show, they had a current affairs show, and a sports show called The Grill Room. And I don't know, I got hired. I don't know why. Paul Schmidt, who was the head of programming there, had faith in me as someone who could learn on the job, and that's what I did. I feel like those days are long gone because these little teeny stations don't exist so much. But I learned to write, I learned to read the teleprompter, I learned to host, I learned to produce and edit. It was everything, and that was it.
And that, of course, led you to an opportunity that took you out to Calgary with Breakfast Television, which would eventually lead to Rogers Hometown Hockey, but a chance to do morning show TV in Calgary and experience the West and morning television, which is a whole different world. The time you have to get up versus primetime hockey.
Yeah, well, I thought I was tired when I was touring, but that was a whole new wake-up call, no pun intended. It was a great opportunity, actually. So Paul Schmidt, the same guy who was running Sun TV, got a job out in Calgary. They were looking for a new host, and I auditioned, and my husband's from Alberta, so it felt a little less foreign to me. But there is no, I don't think there's any better training than doing a morning show, or, something that's like 3.5 hours of live television a day. Because you just have to get used to any number of variables. You guys know what live TV is like. It's like anything can happen. You have to roll with the punches. And so I feel really grateful for that opportunity. And so I guess that's sort of where hockey comes in. To preface it, I grew up a big hockey fan. My dad was a big Habs fan. Mats Naslund was my guy. And I loved the game. I loved the culture of it. My good friend Michael Landsberg had a show back then called Off the Record, and they used to have panelists from all walks of life. So I did his show like 25 times.
Oh, wow.
And even did some web content for them at the NHL Awards. And so I actually, as a musician, was sort of dabbling in the hockey media world. When I worked for City TV in Calgary, I had the opportunity to do some work for Sportsnet, just, whatever there was to do. So some curling, some junior hockey, bobsleigh, soccer. But I knew that I wanted to start to angle my career towards sports. And then the press release for Rogers Hometown Hockey came across my desk. So I threw my hat into the ring.
It's interesting. You just said a word that sort of hit me, and that's versatility. Because when you work with Ron MacLean, you're going to get anything thrown at you, because
right?
I've been there. And you better be ready for the most bizarre question that is brilliant always, but you better be ready. So I'm sure that your background has obviously helped you deal with, our superstar, Ron. I mean, it is
right.
quite something.
And sorry, I forgot your previous question. So I guess I think that's the point, right? I've done so many live shows on stage and so many hours now doing live television. That's it. I mean, it's good to strive for perfection in some ways, but you have to relax a little bit too when it comes to being live, because things will not be perfect. I think the audience doesn't expect or want things to be perfect. I think transparency is sometimes better. But you have to stay on your toes. And I think you guys know this. It's about listening. As much as we all would love to sound brilliant and profound all the time, so much of it is listening. And so whether it's listening to your co-host like Ron or listening to the subjects of our interviews. But I definitely feel like my music career helped prepare me for all of this.
Favorite story? I'm going to put you on the spot. I know you've got many, but you've been across Canada to all these different towns. You've done some amazing things. Have you got a couple of wonderful experiences that stick out for you without, certainly influencing all the other ones with all the great towns you've been to?
In terms of Rogers Hometown Hockey, you mean?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Well, I always, I go back to the sort of education it's provided me and us with. First of all, it's been incredibly humbling to be entrusted with people's stories the way that we have. It's just like, just shatters my heart. But one thing that Ron and I both started to open our eyes to along the way was Canada's fraught relationship with our First Nations, especially as we were approaching Canada 150, which is not necessarily something that our First Peoples mark in the same way. And we were constantly being welcomed by Indigenous Canadians, and really were beginning to understand that we needed to learn more. So I would say in terms of particular stops, last year and this season, we had stops on First Nations. We did our first one on Enoch Cree Nation just outside of Edmonton. And this season we did one in Peguis First Nation in Manitoba. We had Chief Wilton Littlechild, who is an incredible figure in Canadian history, went to residential school. Indian Horse is based on him. The first First Nations law student at UNB. I mean, just like this unbelievably accomplished man. He was one of our guests. He was the Treaty 6 First Nation chief and our Grand Chief. So he and some of our other guests were sitting in our green room on our truck. And this was the first time that we had done a simulcast in Cree with our friends at APTN.
Mm-hmm.
And we were watching them watch an NHL broadcast in Cree. And their eyes were welled up with tears. And that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life.
Great
experience. Yeah. I know that touched a lot of people, and that's the one thing about Rogers Hometown Hockey. You guys have had the opportunity to really touch people lives on stories in many different ways and share them, and I'm sure that's affected you and Ron as well along the way, the same way the viewer is or the person that you're telling the story about has felt.
Yeah, I feel unbelievably blessed. Again, people trust us. They trust us with their stories. They trust us with their sadness. There are a lot of people who come to us and want to talk. I am blown away by the generosity of Canadians. It's been just, I feel so privileged to be able to see the country in this way, and and we have fun too. It's sort of like part travel show. I get to jump in lakes and go ice fishing and do all kinds of go skijoring and Okotoks, and then also an element we don't. There's of course talking to alumni and Team Canada players, and that stuff is amazing. But I love our youth and watching the trajectory of up and coming hockey players too. So it's run the gamut for us, and it's we hope it continues in some way. Obviously, the future is uncertain, but it's been a great privilege for us both.
Yeah, well, the one thing. Oh,
sorry,
go ahead.
Greg,
I was going to say, the one thing about the show. The one thing about the show is just one element of it. When you're in the towns, the festival is amazing, the way everyone comes together. And so I always find the show is just a snippet of what the entire weekend is about for communities. And I guess that's something that, as you talk about, you experience being there in all the different communities and see how much it affects people and affects communities when the tour comes to town, the Rogers Hometown Hockey Tour. There's so much it brings to a community and unites them all. And that's kind of where we're at right now too, is uniting everyone across the country.
If I could turn my computer around, if my room wasn't so messy, I would show you my pucks, because I have piles and piles of pucks from the puck drops I've done across the country. I don't know, hundreds of them there. It's a whole, it's a whole rollout, and in particular, the smaller communities, they're not used to getting this kind of national attention. So it's really fun, and it's an excuse for everybody to gather. But one thing we found is people love their hometowns. It's like, that's the thing, is it's not hard for us to get alumni to come on and talk about it. So, it's everybody from stars of minor hockey on up. People want to come together because they have hometown pride. And so we get to be a part of it, and it all culminates on the Sunday nights.
All right, I'm going to shift gears now. You don't know this either. I have a daughter that's a certified yoga instructor, now being a midwife shortly. So she's dragged me into meditation, obviously, because now I can do yoga, and I actually teach it in my leadership course. So I know a little bit about the heart rate and how that all works now, and I'm getting there. I know we're close, but I wish I knew about it when I was a hockey player. Because certainly in these times as well, it would be so beneficial for so many that don't know a lot about it, which will lead to your show in a minute. But I do want to talk about your interest in sports with it. The whole meditation scene. You grew up with it, you know its value, and maybe we could just, chat a little bit about that.
I just meditation in general, or what do I think about its value?
Yeah, let's start with its value and what it's done for you, and then maybe just slide into sports a little bit also. Yeah.
I mean, in terms of my life, and I think what relates to offering it now for people, I mean, I understand, I think that there are people who gravitate towards having a regular practice, and for some people it's easier than others, but for most of us it isn't, and so there are a lot of us who are like, I can't sit still, I can't do this. Well, the whole point is none of us can really do it. It's a practice. It's something that has to be done fairly regularly, but you don't have to do it an hour a day. You can do it a few minutes a day. And so I really saw its benefit when I was on the road with the band. That was an exhausting, chaotic schedule for me. And I just found solace in taking 10 minutes at the back of the bus or in the hotel room, and just stopping. And whether it was stopping and my mind could slow down, or even just noticing my thoughts, but just having the intention of just stopping is sometimes enough. And so, I've tried to be a regular practitioner. Sometimes I fall off the wagon, but I feel like right now it's just a good time also to stop. Our minds are spinning. There's a lot of fear. And even if it's just for a couple of minutes a day, it's just good to breathe.
Good to breathe and good to stop, and it's so hard to do for all of us, particularly all of us that are a little bit on the, I don't know, we're pretty active. Let's put it that way. So it's a tough go for me. It's yoga forces me to do it, so that's how I can get away with it. But what about in sports now? The value of an athlete. I mean, you're around athletes all the time now, and I know you have some interest in this, so maybe you could share that with us about the value of meditation and how that could help performance, you think?
Well, I mean, I remember hearing and reading about Pete Carroll, the coach of the Seattle Seahawks, and he got into mindfulness meditation, and he started to get his whole team to do it. And I think, you're starting to hear about more what we used to consider alternative practices, like Pilates and ballet even, and lots of yoga. So, these things aren't such foreign concepts, and not to mention, psychology. And so I think as mindfulness meditation has become more mainstream and less dogmatic and less kind of associated with one particular religion, there's an understanding that it's a discipline, much like training our body, that training your mind can really help with focus. So, I'm sort of on a mission to kind of find lists of players and coaches and teams and sports that do practice mindfulness meditation, because that area really interests me. I heard Sarah Nurse talk about it on Ron's show last week. So I want to get her on my show to talk about it, but it can't not be of benefit, right? Like, you're an athlete, aren't you? Like, you want to be in control, right? You want to be in control. So why not learn how to better be in control of your mind?
Focus, right? Mental focus.
Yeah.
And I'm bouncing around a bit because I'm in my basement right now, and literally there is a mouse around my feet. Farm basements, and he's all right there.
Oh my God, that's funny.
So sorry to interrupt, but I had a little bit of a jump going on here. Okay,
Hey,
there we go. There it goes, down the way. I need my cat
That's the
down.
reality of our show. Oh man,
That's hilarious.
he kicked the cat out right before the show. I guess
I did. Should have kept the old cat down there.
All right. Well, if we've got
Anyway.
mice in the studio, we got to get ready to wrap. But on that note, Tara, you're doing some great meditation shows live on Instagram that people can follow along. And they're fun. They're fun to learn a bit about it. And as you said, take a few moments to breathe. That's what we all need to do. And like I said, that would be the full circle, from the meditation through the music, through broadcasts, which of course you got to perform on some Rogers hometown hockey events. Joy Drop reunion was all tied into that as well. So everything all comes full circle here, including the mouse that's circling Millsy's feet right now.
What next, right?
Oh,
Awesome.
yes, it is. Tara, thanks for this. You're looking great. Stay healthy, stay safe. It was a lot of fun, and we'll have to do this again sometime for sure. But thanks for sharing all the stories, and keep up the great meditation work as well.
And best to your
Thank
family.
you guys. Oh, thank you. And you too. You guys stay safe, stay healthy, and keep entertaining us. This show's great.
Thanks.
Well, Tara, it's always a pleasure to have on, of course. And on this show, you never know what you're going to get, including our little guest mouse that was at your feet the whole time.
Well,
the funny thing is, right before the show, you kicked your cat out of the studio. Maybe you should have kept the cat in.
without question, I should have kept the old kitty around. But yeah, living in the country, and the darn mouse just wouldn't go away. I kept kicking at it, and finally, I don't know when it's still around somewhere. We'll save it for next show, I guess.
Yeah, you never know when it'll appear again. Tara mentioned when she grew up, she was a Habs fan, and her favorite player was Mats Naslund. And right away when I thought of that, I thought of this. He was known as the Little Viking, and this is a cover of the Canadiens magazine back from an edition in 1986 when he dressed up as the Little Viking. So that came right there. That was for you, Tara. I thought you'd enjoy that right there, get a kick out of that.
The stuff you have in your basement, I mean, obviously, like everybody else right now, doing a lot of cleaning during your downtime, but I can't believe the things you pull out.
Yeah, well, you clean up, you come across stuff, and then it comes up in this show, and you're able to show it. So
there you go.
There you go. The Little Viking for Tara, but the Little Viking, no help in chasing a mouse out of your studio.
True.
And you never know who will join us on this show. But thank you for joining us on this edition of From the Booth, and we'll see you next time.